welcome to This Explainer. Today, we're tackling one of the most stubborn, complex, and frankly devastating challenges humanity faces, the poverty trap. We're going to dive right into the visceral reality and the complex economics behind why global poverty is just so incredibly difficult to escape. We'll be looking at the daily struggles of individuals, unpacking some groundbreaking economic theory, and checking out macro-level global data to figure out exactly what keeps millions of people locked in a cycle they're desperately trying to break out of.
Imagine a reality where morning begins with hunger, not an alarm clock. That quote perfectly captures the core of what we're talking about today. When your immediate struggle is just surviving the day, long-term planning basically goes out the window. It's no longer about where you see yourself in 5 years, right? It's literally just about how you're going to feed your family today. The horizon of the future shrinks all the way down to the next 24 hours.
Section 1. The daily reality. The visceral struggle for survival. If we're going to wrap our heads around the macroeconomics of poverty, we first have to understand the micro-reality of a daily wage laborer. We have to look at the ground level before we even touch the data. In urban slums, there is no written record. There is no sick leave and absolutely zero security. A single day of illness or even just pure exhaustion doesn't mean you get to rest and recover. It means a total loss of income, no food on the table for your family. In this kind of environment, your physical body is literally your only asset. So any breakdown of that asset instantly triggers a catastrophic economic crisis for the whole household. And the compounding factors here are just relentless. You've got unpredictable daily wage labor, meaning you wake up never knowing if a contractor will even pick you for a job that morning. Toss in the constant fear of eviction from informal housing, and a severe lack of basic infrastructure like running water or electricity. And we absolutely have to highlight the invisible, emotional, and double burden placed on women. Women in these environments are usually managing the household, caring for the kids, and working outside, all while navigating intense physical and economic insecurity. Over time, this relentless instability completely chips away at self-respect and hope. It forces people into a mental state where just surviving today totally eclipses any dreams for tomorrow. Moving to Section 2, Anatomy of a Trap, and Why Hard Work Isn't Enough. Economist Matrishka Tak lays out the mechanics of this relentless cycle perfectly and really proves that hard work alone simply isn't enough to break free. Here's the formal definition we need to grasp. A poverty trap is a self-reinforcing mechanism where extreme scarcity dictates choices and external frictions block economic mobility, keeping generations in destitution. It's so crucial to understand this. Poverty is not a lack of effort. It's a deeply systemic trap built from two main forces: extreme scarcity hijacking human choices and a completely broken external environment blocking any upward movement. So the key is how these two distinct forces interact. It's like getting hit from both sides. On one hand, you have external frictions. Gutok points out that this is when you're trapped by a broken environment, literally no access to capital, failing credit markets, overwhelming technological barriers. The external world is failing you. But on the other hand, you have scarcity-driven behaviors. This is when the sheer panic of scarcity robs you of the mental bandwidth needed to save or plan. And let's be real clear, this isn't some behavioral flaw. It is a completely rational response to an extreme lack of resources. It forces you to prioritize staying alive today over long-term investments like health, education, or business growth. Which brings us to the economic theory behind it, specifically the solo model of wealth accumulation. Think of it like reaching escape velocity. In a perfect world without market imperfections, individuals, regardless of their starting wealth, should eventually converge to a stable, higher level of wealth. Everyone moves up over time. But the real-world frictions we just talked about act like a gravitational pull. They prevent the poorest folks from ever reaching that escape velocity threshold, basically trapping them below the poverty line no matter how incredibly hard they work. Section 3. The education cycle and passing poverty to the next generation. Let's look at how this scarcity directly impacts the absolute best tool for upward mobility we have: education. Academic research by Shah and Mushtaq shows us that the relationship between poverty and education isn't just a one-way street. It is a vicious, bidirectional cycle. Poverty limits education, and in turn, a lack of education virtually guarantees future poverty. It plays out in 4 brutal steps. Step 1, poverty restricts basic resources, like adequate food and secure housing. Because of this baseline deprivation, Step 2 kicks in. Children are forced to drop out of school to work. And I want to emphasize this. Kids aren't dropping out because they lack ambition or they're lazy. They drop out because of the harsh compulsion to support their family's immediate survival. That leads directly to Step 3. A lack of formal skills traps these young adults in the informal sector, exactly like their parents. And finally, step 4, the next generation inherits the exact same poverty. It is a completely closed loop. Section 4, a global standoff, the macro picture of stalled mobility. So now that we understand the individual and generational mechanics, let's zoom out to the global stage. Global data from the World Bank reveals a terrifying macro-level epidemic. 30 years. Let that number sink in for a second. According to their comprehensive reporting, economic mobility across generations in developing countries has completely stalled for the last 3 decades. That means an entire generation has lived, worked, and died without seeing any meaningful systemic movement up the economic ladder. Out of the 50 countries globally with the absolute lowest rates of bottom-to-top economic mobility, 46 of them are in the developing world. If you happen to be born into the poorest households in these specific countries, your chances of climbing the economic ladder and doing better than your parents are statistically vanishing. The trap is no longer just an individual hardship. It's operating on a massive national scale, effectively locking down entire populations. You can clearly see what happens when a country breaks the trap versus when it doesn't. Look at the numbers for South Korea. A staggering 89% of people have achieved higher education levels than their parents. Thailand is right there too, at 85%, showing massive intergenerational progress. But then contrast that with the Central African Republic and South Sudan, both sitting at just 12%. It visually proves that geography and national policy dictate your future just as much as your personal effort. Upward mobility in those bottom regions is nearly non-existent. We also really have to confront the gender divide within this data. In countries like Brazil, China, Egypt, and Indonesia, gender gaps in educational mobility are actually closing, which is a massive global win. But conversely, progress has completely stalled in places like India and Nigeria. In these regions, deeply ingrained cultural biases ensure that women remain uniquely marginalized and economically trapped. They're forced to carry that heavy double burden we talked about earlier, which entirely prevents them from participating in any upward economic movement. Finally, Section 5, breaking the cycle with policy and human solutions. So with all this data and theory, the absolute most crucial point is, how do we actually translate this into real-world change? How do we break the trap? Well, the solutions require a comprehensive dual approach. First off, we've got to implement targeted cash transfers. Like Haddock noted, we have to relieve the immediate, crushing psychological burden of scarcity. Cash transfers free up mental bandwidth so people can look past today's dinner. Second, we need direct interventions to improve market and credit access. We've got to fix those external frictions so small businesses can actually grow. Third and fourth, massive investments in early childhood nutrition, robust school infrastructure, and teacher training. That is how you definitively stop the generational cycle Shaw and Mushtaq identified. And finally, we have to design policies that bypass middlemen and complex paperwork. An administrative burden is a luxury the poor simply cannot afford to navigate. Removing those barriers restores basic dignity to the process of getting help. So here's the question we're left with. Are we just going to be spectators, or are we going to be part of the story? Understanding the mechanics of the poverty trap, seeing exactly how external frictions and scarcity-driven behaviors rob people of their futures, it leaves us with a profound responsibility. We can't just look away anymore. We have to advocate for systemic change. Because as we've seen today, human potential is equally distributed, but opportunity is wildly unbalanced. The mechanics of poverty are complex, for sure, but they are absolutely solvable. So what role will you play in changing that narrative?